right, well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this Back to the Basics training covering cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, and workplace safety and physical security. The training is provided to you free by TCEQ with support from CDM Smith, EJA Associates, and H2O Partners. Today we have speakers from Sam Houston State University and DIR, the Department of Information Resources. Please make sure that you have added your autograph to the sign-in sheet at the back and that your operator number is correct and everything is legible. This course will count for 2 resiliency continuing education credits for either water or wastewater, but this is not the resiliency overview core course. Okay, so this will not count for that. At the end of the course, we also ask that you provide feedback on the course evaluation forms, which we will hand out at the end of the workshop. So I know everyone here is in high demand and very important. I appreciate the on-call nature of the work that we all do, especially in the event of emergencies. However, please put your phones on silent or vibrate. If you need to make a call, please step outside before answering to minimize disruption to others. All right, so without further ado, we will go ahead and get started. We're going to change it up based on the workbook that you have in front of you and start with supply chain risk management. Dr. Willow Yang is an associate professor at Sam Houston State University. She holds a PhD in supply chain and analytics with a minor in marketing from the University of Missouri St. Louis. Before transitioning to academia, Dr. Yang worked in the high-tech industry, leading initiatives in marketing, business development, and consulting at Microsoft, HP, and IDC. Dr. Yang?
Thank you, Wendy. All right, good morning, everyone. I'm a supply chain management faculty at Sam Houston State University. It's actually before pandemic, when people ask me what do I teach at the university, I said supply chain. And often the next question is, what is that? But after pandemic, okay, the same question when I said supply chain, and the response becomes, wow, that's an important field. So supply chain is important, right? Everything we wear, everything we use relies on supply chain. And a supply chain major at Sam Houston State University, in our college is a very fast growing major, okay? If you guys ever need a supply chain intern, you're more than welcome to reach out to us. We'll be very happy to connect you with our students, okay? All right, so for today's session, I'll start with a quick introduction overview of supply chain management. And also I'll talk about why risk management matters. But for this session, the core is really how to identify the potential disruptions, okay? And then more importantly, how we deal with that. Okay, so I'll share some of the tools that I use in the industry, which you guys can leverage in managing your own supply chain as well. Okay. All right, I'll start with this traditional supply chain, and then I'll talk about why I even share the traditional supply chain, because you guys are all related to water wastewater management. Okay, but I'll talk about that, why it's actually the two supply chains kind of very similar. Okay, for the traditional supply chain, here's the focal point, the retailer, right? So end users, we get our product from retailers. Retailer replenish from distributors, sometimes directly from manufacturers, right? And distributors, certainly they need to get their inventory from manufacturers, and manufacturers put together their finished products using components, parts from their suppliers. First-tier suppliers, and these suppliers, of course, they need raw material, all those type of stuff from their suppliers, second-tier, even third-tier suppliers. Okay, so supply chain is actually pretty long, right? If you think about from raw material all the way to the products we use. All right, so from retailer to end users, right? So there's outbound logistics. We call it outbound logistics because products out from retailers. Some major activities in outbound logistics, the major one is fulfilling orders, fulfilling customer orders. Okay. A lot of time it involves transportation as well, especially if you think about online orders. It definitely involves transportation. The activities within retailer, they need to do demand forecast, because otherwise, how do they know how much inventory they need to keep and what kind of products they need to have, right? So they need to do demand forecast. And for retailers like Walmart, they also have their own regional distribution centers. So where they should put the regional distribution centers, so they can, when they ship products from the regional distribution centers to their stores, is fast, efficient, and low cost. Okay, so that's another decision. And also within the regional DC, we call the DC regional distribution centers, they also need to know what kind of products they need to keep and how much they need to keep. Okay, so that's with retailers. And from manufacturers, from suppliers to suppliers, to manufacturers, to retailers, that's called inbound logistics, right? So that involves procurement, okay? There are procurement decisions. And when the order arrives, it involves, you got to unload the truck and put the stuff in the warehouse. So that's material handling. And then it involves transportation as well, right? Shipping products from manufacturers, from distributors to the retailer's regional warehouse or even their stores. It involves transportation. Make sense? All right, so that's traditional supply chain. So why I share that? If you look at the water treatment supply chain, it's very similar. Okay, focal point, the water treatment plants, okay? And from the water treatment plant to the end user, that's outbound logistics. The difference is you guys don't use truck. You use pipe, right, to ship the clean water from your plant to the end users. And of course, you need to do forecast as well, because otherwise, how do you know how much chemicals you need to have? Right? So it involves demand forecast as well. And you guys certainly have inbound logistics as well. I don't know whether you buy directly from manufacturers or from distributors. But either way, it involves procurement management, right? And your distributors, even your manufacturers, they have their suppliers as well, right? They need to get the raw material from the raw material suppliers. So it's very similar, okay, talking about water treatment supply chain versus traditional supply chain. So why that is important, why the similarity is important? That means a lot of the tools, techniques used in the traditional supply chain, used in the industry, you can leverage that as well to manage your own supply chain and your supply chain risk, okay? So which is why I'm sharing both. There are a lot of tools and techniques in traditional supply chain management, and a lot of them you guys can leverage as well. So we call it the supply chain. Okay? But if you look at this picture, okay, we certainly don't just stick to one retailer. We buy from multiple retailers, and same for the retailers. So each retailer, they actually work with multiple manufacturers, right? And the manufacturer, of course, supply multiple retailers. Same with manufacturer's supplier, and also their supplier also deal with multiple manufacturers. So it's not really a chain, it's more like a web, okay? And there are a lot of decisions on this supply web of supply chain, okay? And a lot of decisions relevant to us as well. For example, demand forecast I mentioned earlier. So for supply chain, we tell students, demand forecast is the very first step in managing your supply chain. Everything depends on forecast. Based on the forecast, we decide how much inventory we need to have, right? So inventory decision is based on the forecast. And where we store those inventory is also based on the forecast. So you know the forecast, the demand of different districts, and then you kind of decide where you put your warehouse so you can ship the products quickly from your warehouse to each demand location. And of course, it involves procurement and transportation. I know, I guess for most of you, transportation is actually managed by your supplier. But we need to keep an eye on that as well. I'll talk about it later in another slide as well. Because sometimes transportation could be disrupted, and that will affect our ability to get the product on time. Okay. All right, so why risk management matters? We are talking about supply chain risk. Okay. Because there are a lot of potential disruptions in both inbound and outbound supply chain. Okay, so I'll start with inbound first. Okay. Inbound supply chain, if you recall, in the earlier slides I mentioned, is about we get the chemicals we need from manufacturers and distributors, right? So that is inbound logistics, inbound supply chain. A major risk is supply shortage, chemical shortage. And there are many factors that could cause that shortage. Okay? For example, if you rely on only one supplier, something happened to that supplier, okay, and that's actually very often. It happens, some kind of accident happened to a supplier, that's very often. And then you don't have the product if you only have one supplier. So that is supplier risk, okay? And transportation, like the winter storm in 2021, right? There's just no way, although your suppliers manage transportation, but because of that winter storm, no one can actually ship the product over, right? There is actually a case study about I think it's Trinity, what's it called? Trinity Water Authority? No, Trinity District Authority, but anyway, it's kind of the term in your field. There's actually a case study about that district. Basically, they have one supplier for their chlorine, but the supplier couldn't ship the products over because of the winter storm. But luckily, they had this kind of multi sort of approaches to deal with the potential risk. So at the end, the shortage didn't happen, but it was a close call because they have, I think it's like they keep the inventory level low. In supply chain, we all talk about just in time. They kept the inventory low, but because of that, the interruption because of winter storm and the shipment couldn't come over, so they actually run really close to run out of chlorine. Okay, so transportation, we don't manage transportation, our suppliers manage transportation, but we got to keep an eye on that as well, because if something wrong, it will affect us as a user, right? And then inventory storage risk, right? What about if some contamination happened in the warehouse? Then again, we have a chemical shortage problem. So that is on the inbound side. And outbound side, okay. I think we have a talk specifically focusing on cybersecurity, right? So that could compromise our control system. And extreme weather often, cause equipment failure. And there are also PAP breaks. I don't know how many main breaks you guys have here, but when I gave a presentation back in Conroe, in Montgomery County where I live, it seems there have been something around close to 400 main breaks each year, and the number is forecast to keep growing. It's understandable because the PAP's getting aged, and then certainly there are more breaks instead of less. Right? So those are all the potential risks that's related to outbound distribution. Right? Right. Okay, so why present these slides? So the key takeaway is neither inbound nor outbound has only one risk factor. It's actually multi-layered, sort of vulnerabilities there, which means when it talks about solution, it has to be multi-layered as well. So we can really minimize the potential supply chain risks. Okay, so let's move on to risk management framework. Okay. It's a simple 3 steps. Okay, the first step is to identify the sources of potential disruptions. We are talking about minimizing the impact of the risk, so we got to know where the risk will come from, right? So of course, step 1 is to identify the potential disruptions. So the slide I mentioned earlier, okay, is kind of to give you an idea where you go to identify the potential, disruptions. Right? After that, we need to assess the potential impact of the risk. What do I mean by that? Okay, if you think about risks, okay, there are different levels of risks. For example, pandemic is a risk, is a disruption, right? But pandemic is kind of a black swan event. It rarely happens, but once it happens, the consequences is devastating. Agree? Okay, so that's one type of risk, and I don't think it's, I wouldn't say it's impossible to forecast, but we will need AI to develop, way advanced in order to forecast even when is the next pandemic going to happen. So it's very, very hard to predict. But on the other hand, PAP breaks. It happens often, okay? But the consequences, I wouldn't say it's not serious. It's serious, but it's local, right? It's not widespread like pandemic. And in a way, it's preventable, right? If you put on sensors there, I think to some extent, you could prevent main break, PAP break. You kind of sense it's going to have some issues, and then you kind of take some pre-measures to make sure it won't happen. So it's kind of manageable. Okay, so that's another type of risk. And there's the storms, flood. It's also very hard to forecast accurately. Okay, and the impact is far more serious than tap break. So you see, there are different type of risks. Okay, in terms of how often it will happen, and how accurate we can forecast, and then what kind of consequences this risk will bring. Right? Given that, we got to manage it differently as well. Right? For some of the risks, our focus is probably to prevent it from happening. Okay? But for some other risks, like storm, it's not something we can prevent it from happening. So our focus should be minimizing its impact. Right? It's not something we can prevent it. So our focus should be, how do we minimize its impacts? We have to plan in advance to minimize its impact. Okay. That goes to a third step. So develop a plan to mitigate the impact of the risk. All right, so tools for managing inbound risks. Supplier mapping. Okay, so this is actually very important for us to identify the potential disruptions in our supply chain. Okay, what I mean by supplier mapping. So we probably buy from one or two suppliers. Okay, but they also buy from their suppliers, right? They rely on their suppliers for some raw materials or some other stuff. So supplier mapping, meaning we should have the visibility of the entire supply chain all the way to the origin of the raw material. Okay, it's not something easy to do, but it's important, right? Because our supplier could be, well operated, okay, but it doesn't mean their supplier is not at certain risk. Okay, so we got to identify, we have the visibility of the entire supply chain, so we can identify where the disruptions could come from. Okay, that will take time to develop this supplier mapping, but it's important to do to manage supply chain well. Okay, once we have that mapping, we know our suppliers, their suppliers, and suppliers. We identify all the potential disruptions. The next step is what if analysis. What if something happened, like the fire at a chlorine plant in Louisiana, but that plant is for producing chlorine tablet for swimming pool use. I don't think that's for the water plant. There was a fire at the end of, I think, 2020. Okay, that caused a major shortage for chlorine tablet, and the price for chlorine tablet tripled within a month after the fire. Okay, so there's always some kind of issues here and there, accidents, unexpected happen with our suppliers. So although in normal days, everything goes as normal, but the risk will happen, the accidents will happen, it just won't. So we have to have a plan to deal with it. Okay, and then inventory management. Have you all heard about safety stock? Yes, safety stock. Okay, so we have a regular stock, right, based on our forecast. So the function of safety stock is to make sure, when something happened, like the winter storm, the shipment couldn't arrive on time, we have some buffer there. We have safety stock, okay, to deal with that potential disruption in our supply chain. Right? In traditional supply chain, there's sometimes a demand spike, but I don't think that's a major issue with water management. I don't know whether am I correct? The demand spike probably is not a major issue, but you guys do have supply chain disruptions. So we do need to have some safety stock, right? When something happens, we still have something in stock for the water treatment. All right. And what's this one? Operational and emergency planning. Okay, so that's kind of the planning I mentioned earlier. The last one, optimization models for price volatility. So, okay, so this one, optimization models. So that's kind of that require mathematical programming modeling. Okay, but it actually can be used in many cases. For example, I talked about earlier, right, the fire with the chlorine plant in Louisiana. right? When I mentioned that, people often ask, that's just unfortunate, the price, spike, but what we can do with that? The fire is unexpected. But there is a tool we can actually use to minimize the impact of price increase, okay? Because often we have a long-term contract, right? Most time we have this long-term contract, and then the price is actually, the cost is lower, but then sometimes we don't have enough, we buy from spot market. Okay, if we plan well how much we buy from the long-term contract to get the lower cost, and then we also keep some space there for the spot market, that actually can help us to minimize the impact of that fire caused the price spike. Okay, so there's always a way, I wouldn't say always, but most time there's a way if we plan in advance, we can certainly mitigate the impact of the risk. All right, I know I'm running out of time, but I just want to share with you some of the results. So I talked about optimization modeling earlier. So the chart here, what I'm showing you here is not related to water management, but that's actually from a project we did in healthcare. Okay, the reason I'm showing you this is you see those 4 columns, those just a pseudonym of healthcare organizations. So Alpha, for example, the first one, right? You see the first bar there is really high. That's their current spending. Okay, when you apply some kind of optimization of modeling technique and rearrange sort of how much, what kind of supplier you should buy from, and how much you buy from each supplier, leveraging their contracts. So that's the cost. The second bar, that's the cost. So 35% saving in their procurement cost. So the reason I'm showing this, just to give you an idea, using some kind of techniques, tools used in industry could help us as well. Okay, that's from the cost perspective. Here's the supplier selection, right? Factor rating method. When we select supplier, let's say we have a short list of 5 suppliers, and we want to decide which 1 or 2 we need to, form partnership, strategic partners with. So that's one of the techniques we could use, factor rating method. Today the time is short. I wouldn't be able to go into the details of that, but this method is actually pretty straightforward. Okay, it doesn't require sophisticated mathematical modeling. No, it's just kind of basic, minus plus multiplication. But you got to know the technique behind factor rating method. Okay. All right, now let's talk about tools managing outbound risks. Okay, digital twin. I'm sure you heard this fancy word. So what is digital twin? It's basically to mimic the physical system. Okay, so we have a physical system, and we put this physical in the computer, digitalize it. So why do we want to do that? So when you experiment some kind of measures, you don't really have to do that with your physical system. Okay, you can actually do that in this virtual world and perform what-if analysis. What if there's another major storm? What about winter storm comes again, different area, all those? You can see what's the impact to your system. Right? So you can plan in advance, and then to have a plan to mitigate the risk, the impact. All right, and also part and equipment readiness. That's actually important as well, because when something goes wrong, we need to fix it, right? A lot of time it requires parts. We need to have the parts to fix it, okay? So we got to make sure we have that parts ready on hand. So that's related to parts management. You don't want to keep every part on hand, and you don't want to keep too many, because inventory costs money, right? And also you have the space to store those products as well. So that comes to parts management, and also where you put it. You can't put it in all those places. You probably want to put it in a few warehouses, and then where you located those warehouses. So when something happens, you can quickly get that part to get your equipment fixed. Okay, that's part management. So talking about that one, so this is another technique you can consider. For example, to decide where I stock those parts. So it's called facility location. Again, this tool is called, let me see. All right, I'm not going to go to the details of that. It's called center of gravity approach. already. Center of gravity approach is used often in the industry. For example, when Home Depot try to decide where they put their regional distribution center, they start with this tool as well. Center of gravity analysis is, again, this one is not a rocket science tool. It's actually very easy to use. It's just you need to know, kind of the basics of how to use it, like factor rating method. Straightforward, but very effective. A lot of effective tools aren't really that sophisticated, but it's really helpful. All right, okay, my time is up, and that is my last slide. Thank you, and this is my contact info, and if you have any questions, welcome, shoot me an email.
We'll just take a quick moment to transition to the next PowerPoint presentation. So next up, we have vulnerability assessment and emergency preparedness for critical infrastructure. Today, our speakers are going to be Raina Loosemore, who is the program manager for the water and wastewater sector at the Institute for Homeland Security at Sam Houston State University. She has approximately 10 years of experience in the public sector, where she worked as an industrial hazardous waste investigator and later as an environmental crimes investigator for the TCEQ. Raina has also served in academia as the Biosafety and Chemical Manager for the Environmental Health and Safety Department at Sam Houston State University. She later transitioned to the private sector as an environmental scientist focused on landfill operations in Texas and Mississippi. Raina holds a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Sam Houston State University and a Master of Science in Environmental Management from the University of Houston Clear Lake. We also have presenting with her Roberto Villarreal. He serves as a project manager at the Sam Houston State University Institute for Homeland Security. In this position, he is responsible for developing new partnerships and managing critical infrastructure projects across various sectors, including local government and private industries. Additionally, Mr. Villarreal oversees the Institute's Professional Development Training Series, which focuses on critical infrastructure protection, security, vulnerability, and tabletop exercises for professionals in the energy, water, and wastewater industries and transportation sectors. He is currently pursuing a Master of Legal Studies with an emphasis on risk management and compliance at Texas A&M School of Law. Thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Just giving you a quick, I know we have 30 minutes, just giving you a quick background on the Institute for Homeland Security. We are housed within Sam Houston State University, yes, within the College of Criminal Justice. We are funded by the state legislature, and we attempt to address vulnerability gaps through education, research, and training in 5 of the 16 critical infrastructure sectors. So right now we have water, wastewater, energy, healthcare, transportation, and chemical. So with that said, we're gonna be going through the vulnerability assessment and emergency preparedness. We are going to be going through a quick refresher on the American Water Infrastructure Act, the Risk and Resilience Assessment, RRAs, and the Emergency Response Plan, ERPs. And then Roberto then is gonna cover the CARBR Vulnerability Assessment Tool. It's just a tool to help you prepare your workforce and enhance your response on the RRAs. AWIA, the Safe Drinking Water Act, I think it was Section 1433 was amended in 2018, and so it requires community water systems that serve more than 3,300 people to put together an RRA and and after that create an ERP that goes along with it. Any community water system that is less than 3,300, I believe the EPA at this point is not asking you to have one, but you should definitely be working on one. As a former investigator, I was always tell entities best management practices. Let's try to get ahead of it and try to prepare, even though it's not required. There's not a requirement. There's not a must or a shall in there yet. The RRA gives you a set of categories, asset categories. It's just a template for you to get started. You don't have to follow these. Again, follow your specific design, where you're located. You know your plant better, and so when you're going through these asset categories and assessing what's the risk from a natural hazard or a malevolent act, you can decide which one fits best. And with any government document, there is a deadline, and the RRAs need to be reviewed every 5 years. And anytime you review and revise it, you submit that to the EPA, you certify that you've done that, and then within 6 months of doing that, any changes you make, those need to be put into your ERP. And I think that the next deadline, the 5-year deadline, is December 31st, 2025, for that specific population served. The ERP is just a plan to help you respond to an incident, right? Be better prepared. And it has 4 main components. We're talking about the strategies to help you improve your resilience. Think about physical security, cybersecurity, any plans and procedures that you have in place that could lessen the impact or could assist you in preparing for that. And then action and equipment that could lessen the impact of an attack or a natural hazard, and any detection strategies that could help minimize the risk for your plant. Again, the whole point is to be resilient and continue business continuity of your services. And again, the ERP is due 6 months after your RRA, so make sure you don't forget about that one.
So water risk and resiliency in the community water system. So we deal with risk every day. So in simple terms, what is risk in the community? So let's identify first, what are the risks associated that can impact your community? And then from there, I want to say, let's put a parenthesis over risk. Let's first identify what are the risks, and then how are we going to manage it? So later on, we'll put another parenthesis under management to see how we're going to manage those risks. So like, for example, we deal with risks every day. For example, we're driving down the road, you see the light is green and it turns yellow. You split and you gun it, you keep going. The low probability of you crashing is low, but for example, you have a yellow light turning into red. You make the determination if you go or you stop, and you stop because you might be able to hit someone else, or someone else hitting you because their light is already green. Those are some risks that you can manage. But in the water sector, there are some risks that you cannot manage. So it's important for you to understand what are the risks associated with your operation, so you're able to manage it and understand what is the level of exposure that you have. So from there, it's important to understand what is the risk appetite that you have in your operations or in your corporation. If you don't know what is your risk tolerance, it's important to understand what it is, so you're able to see how you're going to be managing those risks as you move forward. And so if, for example, you have a high risk tolerance, that means that maybe your corporation is able to sustain that risk. They're able to take the risk on and be able to be not exposed, but like be able to take in the risk. But if your risk appetite is low, that means that maybe your corporation might be a little bit more rigid and more cautious on how they're going to be able to take those risks. And I mean, they're aware that those risks exist, but they're more cautious on how they're going to be managing those risks. From there, once we understand what is the risk appetite or the risk tolerance, it's important to understand what are your critical assets. And so most of people don't understand what our assets are, and it's simple. Assets are components that have monetary impact. So like if you lose something, that has impacts with your corporation. So for example, if you lose chlorine, what happens to your water treatment plant? You're not able to operate, so that has an impact in the corporation. That it has monetary impacts, it has reputational impacts, your community is impacted. So start thinking, what are some critical assets that you need in order for you to operate in your operations, if it's either the water treatment plant or the wastewater. And so from there, you understand what are your critical assets, and you're able to develop a list of what are your critical assets. So now you know these are the assets that I need in order for me to operate in my operations. And then from there, I want you to start thinking on what are your critical assets, and I'm going to be showing you a method called Carver method that can be used to see what is the priority of each critical asset that you have identified already on the list. And so why am I telling you this is because this tool that we're going to show you, it's easy to use, it's not sophisticated, and it gives you a better awareness of what are your priorities in the corporation. And And then after you identify those critical assets, then you can apply the different components of what is the volatility, what is the probability, what are the vulnerabilities of those critical assets, and then what are the consequences. And that's just basic, right? So once we understand all those concepts of what are your critical assets, your risk appetite, and you're able to manage it and see what are the priorities, now that gives you a better situational awareness of what are your risks associated and how exposed you are to those risks. So now let's put a parenthesis under management. We already identified what are the risks, but now how are we going to manage it? And we got to understand that line workers and decision makers are totally different. So how are you as a line worker going to put the value behind why we need to protect these critical concepts? And why is it critical that we need to manage those risks? Because if we don't manage, how does that impact your operations? So always be thinking when you're presenting problems, what is the value behind it? So why should your decision makers be putting more resources or allocating different components to protect those risks?
This is just a friendly reminder slide, really. We've done other presentations and other trainings before, and we've heard here and there why does it matter? I'm just the operator, right? But we're trying to change that mentality a little bit, and using the cover method, you can actually bring operators and management all together in one. And why we do this is because of that, I call it the consequence wheel. That's not the title, but that's what I'm calling it. But the Department of Homeland Security did an assessment on critical infrastructure that depend on water for core operations. And out of those critical infrastructure sectors or entities that responded, they indicated that within 8 hours or so of losing a water service or wastewater services, at least 50% of the core operations will go down. I don't know if you can see the diagram a little bit bigger in your booklets, but the hospital, within 2 hours of losing services, 67% of the core operations go down. So this is why doing vulnerability assessments, it's important. Not all vulnerabilities are the same, not all of your entities are the same, and you need to prioritize time and resources. And so with the Carver method that Alberto's going to talk about, this is where everyone needs to come to the table and participate. And we're trying to make folks understand that the weight of the bigger picture, right, and the weight of the responsibility that everyone carries every single day, though we don't really think about it.
So with the Carver method, this is a vulnerability assessment tool that you can use. It's easy to use. I'll explain a little bit of what the history is and how we got Carver method connected to the water and wastewater sector. So the Carver method started back in Vietnam. The CIA was using the Carver method to identify different locations and assess what were the vulnerabilities that location had and how were going to be able to attack those locations. While we're not using it to attack places, but we're here to use it to protect your assets, to identify what are the vulnerabilities and rank what are the vulnerabilities that you have present in your locations, so then you can manage it better. You can be more aware of what are the situations that you already have present, what are the threats that are more prone to happen in your location, and how can you manage those vulnerabilities. And so how we got connected the Carver method was while working in South Texas with one of the largest utility companies in South Texas, we were working on tabletop exercises on their location. And so this utility company has the energy sector and water and wastewater on the same location. I mean, they have the water treatment plant in front of a substation. So we were talking about how can we prepare the employees so they're more prepared on what are the vulnerabilities that location has. And then we can go into the exercise and everybody knows what are the vulnerabilities and how to manage whatever impact that we were going to show in the exercise. And so we came up with, let's use the Carver method. It's easy to use. It's not sophisticated. Anyone can understand the different components on how to assess it. And I'll explain how you are able to apply those rankings of the Carver method. And so we tried it out like about 3 times in different dates, and it worked out. People were more aware of what were the vulnerabilities and how to manage those vulnerabilities. And so we broke up teams, like 3 teams, and we gave them specific locations, like a treatment plant, we gave analytical lab, and a wastewater plant. And so then we gave them specific threats, like sabotage, physical attack, or insider threat. And so then those groups got together, and they collaborated on the analytical lab, and what were their, for example, the threat was insider threat. So what were the associated threats based on an insider threat at an analytical lab? And so they went through each critical asset that they had in the analytical lab and assessed it with the different things that I'm going to be showing in the next slides. And so this gives the employees a better understanding of what are their critical assets, what are the vulnerabilities, and then with the cover method applied, it prioritizes each asset of what you need to be focused on. And so cover method is an acronym, so each letter represents something. So for example, the C means criticality, the A, accessibility, R, recoverability, V, vulnerability, E, effect, and R, recognizability. So using these terms, for example, if we're assessing chlorine, so then you go through each letter and you assess what are the different risks associated with each letter for chlorine. Once you assess, you know what the chlorine is, the description, right? What are the associated threats? And then you're going to be ranking from 1 to 5. 1 to 5, what is the level of vulnerability that that asset has? So like, for example, right here, this is the data sheet that you're going to be using. If you were to use Carver method, you follow each letter, and then you have a ranking 1 to 5, 5 being the highest risk exposure. So based on how you know your assets more than anyone else. For example, using chlorine, how would you rank the chlorine for criticality? How critical is it? How accessible chlorine is to your operations? How are you able to recognize it? Is it easy to recognize? Is it not hard to recognize? So then from there, you apply those rankings. Once you apply those rankings, you're able to see how it color codes. If you put a number 5, it means that it's high risk. So you're able to visualize. And what I was telling you, when we put a parenthesis under management, you're able to see, to explain to the decision makers, hey, chlorine is a critical component that I have in my location, and this is why. And in the end, it gives you a percentage of how critical that concept or that asset is to your operations. And so, for example, we use 3 assets right here just for simple terms, but in reality, you're going to have 10, 20 assets, and it's going to give you a percentage of how vulnerable that asset is to your operation. And what that means to you is that now you're able to tell your decision makers, I need these 5 assets, and I need resources in order for me to protect so we can continue operations and not interrupt my operations to our community, because at the end of the day, you are the community because you also depend on that water. So how are you going to manage those risks? And so it just gives you more situational awareness, and it's an easy tool to use. You don't need like expensive computers to do the assessment. There's just formulas. It's an Excel spreadsheet. We can do the formula, and there's a book on Carver method that teaches you the formulas that you need to put the Excel spreadsheet. You can just plug in numbers, and it'll give you those percentages. So it's an easy tool. You can let us know if you need help. We can teach you how to use the Carver method, how to apply it to your ERPs, and do an assessment for your employees to see how readily they're available to understand what their vulnerabilities are associated with their locations. So it's a simple tool that you can use, and it doesn't cost nothing. It's free. So, and the RRA with the Carver methods. I jumped in.
No, you're fine. With the Carver method, we're not trying to replace the RRA. Honestly, the RRA goes through your assets, and then you pick a malevolent act or a natural hazard that poses the greater risks to you or to that particular asset. So with the Carver method, we're just trying to enhance the response that you're going to be given to the EPA and saying, yes, we are ready. And instead of just writing something down, one person really being in charge of completing this RRA and then just filling something out and submitting that. With Carver, what we found out is we tend to put the training people in groups, and usually we mix and match and have them go through the assets. And some of the things that we've discovered is, for example, there might be the lab services people. they would say that lab technicians, it's a critical asset for them, but the cybersecurity people would not even think about that, or operations people would not think about that. So we try to put everyone in the room, operators, managers, so that everybody can see what they consider is a risk to them based on what they do every day. We're not there what you do every day. Management is not there, obviously seeing every day. So I think it's a good tool for you guys to come all together, find your vulnerabilities for your entire plant, and then submit a more enhanced response on the RRA and be prepared with ERP. Did you have a question?
One thing about it, what is the protection as well as operating a plant with computers and stuff, even though it's manually also worked on too, but have it away from Wi-Fi and fiber optic connections to prevent backdoor or somebody getting in there and tampering with your plant and fooling with stuff if they could get in there to that computer system and start doing this and that, and just have a computer itself just for the plant, but not anything connected with Wi-Fi or fiber optic. You know what I mean? No line hooked up to it. He just operates everything inside that plant, and that's it. But it has nothing to do with any of that could get cyber optic malware. Even though sometimes managers like to have a system where they can look at the plant besides working on weekends and holidays and see how everything is running. And then this is where it ends up getting somebody in the back door to get into that computer system.
So repeating the question, like what is the reliability of a technical and then having a manual operation, right? That's what you were saying. So then we also go into that in specific, like what if the SCADA system is offline? So how are you going to manage those resources or those assets manually? So we also have an example that we give the students. If you were not able to operate with a tech, how are you able to manage it manually? So we also go through those assets. What are the assets that you need, and what are the things that you need in order for you to operate while offline? So, and that's an easy list that we can develop. And I imagine your corporation already has a list of assets that you need in order for you to operate manually, and then you can apply the cover method easily because you already have those assets already identified. So, yeah, we can apply the cover method to that as well.
But you can operation, but you know, and you can tell what's this and that, and then maybe call an operator on the radio, go over here and check this and that. This don't look too well, but it has nothing to do to hook to a line, fiber optic or Wi-Fi, for somebody to get into that computer.
Well, I don't know, for the people that was not able to hear that the communication back and forth of how the operators operate while it's offline. So again, this tool is another tool that exists for vulnerability assessments. We know that, for example, Thyre exists, but this is another tool that you can use. It's easy to use, but the good thing of this, that we've trained about 100 people with a cover method. It always generates communication between those different employees that are either there in the energy sector, in the water sector, because it's a utility company. So there's cross-pollination of what their risks that they see in their operations, but they're also now they're communicating to their safety and security department. Hey, I'm seeing these risks. I'm seeing these vulnerabilities. What can we do about it? And before we did the cover method, those communications were not happening as often. And now that we train those people, those communications have been a little bit more often than usual. So it's another tool to communicate to your decision makers, what do you need in order for me to operate in continued operations? So, yep. Thank you for asking those questions, sir. And so lessons learned, I pretty much just said that it's another tool. It's free to use. We can help you, teach you how to fish, and then you can go fish by yourself. So this is an easy tool. It's an Excel spreadsheet. You put those rankings on the formulas, and then you just plug in numbers, and boom, you have the result of how vulnerable that asset is. So it's pretty easy to use. It's not sophisticated. And then there's a book about it if you want to read about cover method. It's an easy read. I like the book. It's really good. And then thank you, appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Unless there's any other questions, we'll be glad to answer them.
All right, so next up, we're going to go ahead and transition to cybersecurity, which is at the front of your workbooks. So our speakers today, we have Jonathan King, who is the Director of Response and Strategic Planning for Texas DIR. This role is responsible for supporting the preparedness for, response to, and incorporation of lessons learned from cybersecurity incidents. He also facilitates the statewide Incident Response Working Group. This group builds on previous response activities and endeavors to coordinate the activities and multiple state agencies working toward the unified goal of supporting the state incident response processes and procedures. He is passionate about incident preparedness. Jonathan joined DIR with over 10 years of experience working in emergency management, preparedness, and response. Jonathan has a Bachelor of Science in Emergency Administration and Disaster Preparedness with a minor in Geography from the University of North Texas in Denton. Also today we have Richard Morse, who is the Senior CIRT Analyst and Threat Researcher for the Department of Information Resources. Richard is a senior analyst and threat researcher. He protects cybersecurity assets across the state by supporting cybersecurity incident detection, incident response activities, threat assessments, and provides additional cyber threat intelligence. Prior to joining DIR, Richard served as the Information Security Officer for the Texas Office of Court Administration, where he was responsible for managing the Information Security Program for OCA and numerous judicial entities throughout the state of Texas. He began his career in cybersecurity as a communications and information officer with the United States Air Force. Richard has a Bachelor's of Business Administration from New Mexico State University and a master's degree in computer resources and information management from Webster University. Gentlemen?
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I need to remember 3 sentences max for my next bio. As was introduced, my name is Jonathan King. I'm the Director of Response and Strategic Planning for the Department of Information Resources. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Department of Information Resources, we're a state agency based out of Austin, and we have primary responsibility for IT and cybersecurity in the state. You know, that relationship between state agencies, institutions of higher education, and junior colleges is very well defined. But when we move to the city county school district, it's a little less well defined. So I always like to say that there's 2 regulations on cybersecurity for cities, counties, and local jurisdictions. One is that you have to report security incidents to DIR within 48 hours. And the next one is that you have to take a cybersecurity awareness training annually. That's kind of it, which is different than organizations like TCEQ, where there's a much different relationship. EPA still a different relationship. It is it's a lot about partnerships, a lot about learning, and a lot about trying to communicate risk and provide resources that are free or no cost to organizations that need it. So for today, we'll talk a little bit about, demystifying cybersecurity incidents. I think that, so I remember back when I was at TDEM, we would make a lot of map products for disasters. And there was this expectation that it would just be done instantly. I think that's kind of the CSI effect or the cop drama effect, and it's not true. It takes time. And cybersecurity incidents and incident preparedness, it takes time as well. So we'll talk about a little bit about some incidents, and then go through some real life scenarios. And our goal is not to shock and awe, but to empower. So the attitude we've been taking lately is that the security of cyber physical systems is not about the security of that single system, but about the security of society. I think you heard that a little bit earlier when one of the presenters talked about how long business and industry can last without water. So that's kind of kicks to the criticalness and the criticality of what y'all do. So I like to start with the understanding the threat landscape, and I really like this slide. So I think from a cybersecurity and incident response perspective, our function is hardening systems to make sure that they're difficult to get into and access, making sure that our services are available as much uptime as we can provide, making sure that those business processes are documented and they're resilient, that we have security incident management plans, and that the resources are ready to go when needed. But I'd kind of like to hear from the audience, from the drinking water and the wastewater, your priorities are probably different than incident response and security incident management, right? I mean, if top priority, anybody want to shout out anything that they care about from their perspective? Alrighty, so we can read from the list on the left. So supply and reliability, you worry about sampling, We're about natural disasters, workforce management, all the things that I see in the water sector as important. But where's that overlap, I think, comes to a little bit of the CIA triangle with the addition of safety. So we want to make sure that our systems are functional, they're operational, that your customers' data are protected, and that the systems operate in a safe and secure manner. So who's attacking us? We always like to know who's attacking our water systems. We break them down into several different buckets, starting at the baseline. It's that nuisance hacker. People who are, defacing websites, just trying to make a name for it, or, taking advantage of, kits they can get online, to just build a name for themselves. And we added for this presentation and the presentation previous insider threats. So insider threats we heard a little bit about earlier, and it can be, malicious insider, thinking about a call I received from a tow truck company in, I think it was El Paso. Fired employee, bricked the system, and left. That's the malicious insider threat. And then there's the accidental insider threat. Maybe someone just forgets to back up your infrastructure, makes a mistake, even down to spills a cup of coffee on the logbooks and destroys your records. That's the insider threat. And then something we've seen a lot lately, and it kind of ebbs and flows based on the political cycle, is the hacktivists. So that's your anonymous. These are the people that are trying to DDoS and do a denial of service attack on your public-facing infrastructure, just to make a political point. What we have to deal with more than anything in our function is that organized crime gang, where they're in it for the money. So they're going to make their impact as painful as possible with encrypting your data, destroying your settings, trying to cause physical harm to your infrastructure, and then stealing your data and holding it for ransom. So that's your ransomware games, international extortion. And then something we see that is difficult to detect, but will be very impactful at a given time, is the state-sponsored or advanced persistent threats. So that's your big four, your China, Russia, North Korea, and Iran. These are the organizations that are in systems across the country, but they're waiting. They're using it strategically. They're lurking in the background, they're developing persistence, and if there's a need to enter into a near-peer conflict as opposed to an asymmetric conflict, they have the access. So that's who's doing it. I'm going to ask Richard to give an idea of what they're doing. Richard?
Yep, thank you. Again, thank you, Jonathan. I'm Richard Morris. I'm the Senior CERT Analyst with DIR. So I'm going to go over some of the issues that we're seeing that are impacting water utilities and water-specific sector entities. You probably are pretty aware already of some of these issues that we have listed up on the screen. You probably already may have experienced personally phishing or spear phishing attacks designed directly to impact you personally, but we're also seeing that directed at specific individuals within your particular sector, because you are a fairly important sector within our general overall society. So we're also seeing things like web defacements that impacts your customer data as well as your overall operations, depending on if you have those systems online. We're also seeing denial of service attacks. Jonathan mentioned those, and we'll go over those in some specific examples. And lastly, I'll give you my own personal experience dealing with ransomware. We were impacted with the judiciary. These particular groups that are performing or doing these particular types of attacks really don't care who you are as an organization. They are going to exploit whoever they can to try to get either the data or the money that they're looking for. So these are just some of the things we're going to go over. And first, I'll talk a little bit about phishing. Like I said, you probably already have some experience using this. You've probably experienced this in your own personal email day to day. These individuals are trying to get that initial access to your systems that you have. Most often these methods are going to be through email, but we're seeing them now through phishing as well as texting. You may have seen examples where Highway Toll Authority is sending you a late billing notice. and they're asking you to enter in particular credit card information so you can pay that. That's all fake. So the goal is to gain that initial access to your systems. They're trying to gain those credentials and look and see what they can have access to. So they're just trying to look to see what they can get access to. Harvesting credentials is actually another goal. And what they're looking to do is cause loss of the systems that you are using. So probably the most important mitigation that you can do is educate your employees. We often go out to these type of events to talk about education awareness, making sure your employees know what a legitimate email looks like. Oftentimes they'll send things like password resets. They'll tell your employees that, hey, your account's going to expire. Please enter your credentials at this particular URL or link. Those are very easy to mimic online. They're very easy to harvest images online and create what's like a legitimate looking website. Another thing you can do is implement what's called MFA, or multi-factor authentication. You might have experience already using this with your own personal banking. MFA is a way to require you to enter in a PIN or an additional method of authentication to determine who you actually are as an individual. So it's not as complex as you think it might be. If you work with your particular IT service provider or your IT staff within your organization, it's very easy to implement. And MFA, in our opinion, is one of those very initial steps that you can do to protect yourself. So if you can implement that, that would be greatly beneficial. So moving on to website defacements, we're seeing a lot more of this now based on the current geopolitical climate around the world. Our particular nation has problems with other countries, that's obvious, but all of us in this room actually are inadvertently impacted by that particular type of stuff, because those countries that don't have the same military capability as the United States often will use asymmetric methods or non-traditional methods to actually impact us, and they are looking at impacting not only the water sector, but also the energy sector, the transportation sector. We're seeing this all across the board. So it's not just specific to the water sector. This particular image was taken off of a state agency website that was impacted. These two individuals, one is a nuclear scientist, the other one is a general in the Iranian Republican Guard who was killed, and you're going to see more and more of this type of activity impacting public sector entities. You know, they look to see who they can get access to, and if you have your OT and IT systems online, they're going to scan for those systems, then they're going to put out, you know, political messages like this. Now, this may not look like anything important, but this could be, you know, damaging to your particular organization's reputation, right? So you need to think about, you know, what systems you're putting online, you know, making sure that those are protected and they're not just open for anybody to access. And I'm going to show you some specific examples of some other entities later on in this presentation of what happened. So understand what you have out there. Consider incorporating more security or better security on those systems so people can exploit them. So Jonathan talked a little bit about what are called DDoS attacks, or distributed denial of service attacks, and these are basically attacks where they overwhelm a system with network traffic. And so we're seeing a lot more of this day to day. We have a network security operations center that protects state agencies, but we're also trying to see, you know, if there's other entities that we can look at. But one of the goals here is just to make sure that those systems that are online are unusable to anybody. So if you are putting your OT and IT systems online, just understand that those systems are going to be targeted by these different entities that Jonathan mentioned. Some of the mitigations here is talk to your internet service providers. If you don't have an IT staff and you're going through an ISP, sometimes they'll have particular mitigations that they can implement to protect you. If you have IT staff, make sure they know what abnormal traffic looks like. Oftentimes, you know, they just need to to mention it, and we're going to give you resources at the end of this presentation that you can talk to, somebody at the state, or if you need to talk to local law enforcement or federal law enforcement, we're going to have those contacts as well. So it's all about reducing your attack surface, implementing things like firewalls or VPNs to protect that access, and make sure you just have redundancy within your systems. I could talk a little bit about this from my time with the judiciary. I did mention that these particular groups or attackers really don't care who you are, and we were actually the organization that I worked for, I was the information security officer for the state judiciary, which includes the Supreme Court of Texas, Court of Criminal Appeals, and the 14 appellate court districts. So all the high-level courts, and we were impacted by a ransomware attack. And what this basically is an attack, and it encrypts your systems so they are unusable to people within your organization. So it took us about 60 days to recover fully. So we were lucky. We made some mitigations ahead of time, so we were partly online, we were partly in the cloud, but all of our physical systems within our organization were pretty much unusable, and we had to basically start from scratch. So again, the goal is to make the systems unusable. And basically what these attackers will do is that they'll ask for some type of payment. That's usually in the form of Bitcoin. The actual amount that they were requesting from, and this is rather funny, but it's, they're requesting this money from the judiciary like we were going to hand this money over, but they were asking for $1.5 million. And those figures are actually going higher and higher. So they do not care who you are, how big your organization is, or what kind of money you have. They're going to ask for any kind of money. They'll do things like double and triple extortion. So if you do decide to interact with these organizations and do decide, hey, let's pay a little bit of this money, they will try to actually get more money out of you. And so it's probably in your best interest not to interact with these folks at all. You're dealing with criminal organizations, okay? They're usually based in Eastern Europe or in some territory where our federal law enforcement cannot get to them. So it's best to train your employees, make sure they're aware of what they're installing. My opinion, you should probably limit the types of software that your employees can install on your systems. You may inadvertently install something, and we'll have an example later on in this presentation of an individual inadvertently installing some a particular script that caused malware to be installed on their systems. So if you can have endpoint protection software, which actually will detect sometimes when things are being installed on your systems, that's probably a good idea as well. And making sure you're testing your backups. If you have backups of your systems, make sure you're testing those. Don't wait until you get impacted, okay? Make sure you test them ahead of time. Test them on, it could be a virtual system or even a subset of something that's not on your network, but make sure you're testing those. And then I think to your point, sir, about making sure systems are segmented, having your OT and your IT systems not connected in any way. I mean, I think that is definitely a good recommendation, and that will definitely help. So I know I talked a little bit about phishing and spear phishing, so I don't want to insult y'all's intelligence, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of give you an example of how this normally occurs. And like I said, the most common method is sending an email to an individual, and what they'll try to do is they'll send out an email that looks very valid and legitimate looking, depending on the system that you're using. And a lot of examples at the state level, they're targeting Microsoft Office. So they'll send a official looking email to the victim. If the individual doesn't realize what they're doing and inadvertently enters their credentials, they're actually giving these individuals access, okay? And that's exactly what they're looking for. They don't care what the individual is. They want that initial access. They'll collect those credentials, either username or password, via a well-crafted website that looks legitimate, and then they'll take it from there. They'll usually, obviously they'll take the credentials, but whatever access they can get, they'll get. They'll try to harvest data and what's called exfiltrate data out of your networks, and this is usually going to be customer-related information, personal identifiable information, anything they can use to further their particular malicious activities. So a little bit more, talking about ransomware, some of the impacts that you may see is your systems are going to be impacted. You have potential of losing customer records. Your billing systems can be taken offline. In our particular case at the courts, we lost not only access to our phones, but email, but luckily we had access to the cloud, so we were still somewhat operational. So I know some of these other groups talked about having disaster recovery plans or some type of plan where you can basically test out how you guys may respond. That's always a good idea. But understand that your systems are going to be inoperable. So whatever you can do to protect or segment your OT and IT systems, that would probably be most beneficial to you. One of the things that we do at DIR is we will actually go out and look for exposed assets with different tool sets that we have. We want to try to see what's actually out there. This here is an example of what we look for. And remote desktop protocol is a capability that's built into Windows and other Linux systems that allows people to remotely connect to remote systems. So we understand that every organization is going to be different, and there's going to be needs for employees to be able to remotely connect. So what we're encouraging folks to do is make sure they securely configure these systems, right? So only authorized users can access them. You can do that with a VPN or firewall, crafting specific rules to only allow specific access. Make sure you're not exposing too many different systems online. Again, this is all going to be dependent on your specific organization, but really talk to your IT staff and try to figure out what is the best way to incorporate this. So our staff, we will actually look for different systems, and I'll show you an example of what we found, particularly in the water sector, of a system with some default settings and default passwords we were able to access. And we'll also show you a little video of an actual attack that occurred for several entities within the water sector here. So understand that things like remote access can be convenient, but understand that also attackers can see those systems as well. So you got to make sure you're locking those systems down. This is the particular image that I'm talking about. Me and my colleagues were able to look and find default passwords for systems that were put online. We're able to go in, and we didn't tamper with anything, but I will show you a video of an actual incident that occurred from a group in Russia that was targeting several municipal water systems within the state of Texas here. So that second bullet point talks about default passwords. Attackers love that if they can access systems that have default passwords. So make sure whatever vendors you're using within your particular environments, ask them or try to look into the documentation. Sometimes they will inadvertently have that information posted online. Attackers will love looking for those type of systems. Let's see here. So here's another example of what we were talking about earlier, particularly with the geopolitical issues that are currently going on. This is a display of a Unitronics system which are developed in the nation of Israel. You may have these systems within your networks. These particular systems were targeted by a group that was leaning more favorably toward the nation of Iran, and they decided to go ahead and attack systems, regardless of how you feel about this. Yes, sir. Did you have a question?
When you just showed a few minutes ago that slide about that Israeli and that Iranian thing, and those people up there nowadays, everybody better pay attention, be more alert, since we drop bunker bombs over there and then stop them.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yeah, that is the same comment. He's mentioned about the geopolitical issues that are going on, and that's kind of the point that I was trying to make, is that regardless of how you feel about it personally, you are a target. Okay, you are an important sector, and the asymmetric nature of warfare, particularly with these countries that cannot match up with the United States in terms of military power, they are going to look for systems or things that they can manipulate. And like I said, we'll show you an example of what actually happened, particularly with a group that was aligned with the nation of Russia, and the United States is on the side of Ukraine, and there's a particular conflict between Russia and Ukraine going on. We'll show you a video of what happened there. But
Can I add something, Richard?
Yes, sir.
Can I go back? I think this is an interesting. So this one was taken out of the Houston area, and this was on a H2S scrubber, so it was on the wastewater side. The other ones we saw were on flushers to maintain chlorine levels. And the organizations that had these impacted, they didn't know they had these PLCs in their system. They didn't have a good inventory of their IT and OT. This is something that the vendor, put in their system to provide access and automation. So we heard earlier from one of the groups about doing the Carver process, about understanding what is in your organization, what is in your supply chain infrastructure. So I think I just wanted to touch on that. That's one of the big things, is that they didn't realize it until the vendor came out and said, "Oh, you've been hacked." And fortunately for this one, it didn't impact the operational or the operations. It was just a visual defacement. But man, it's tricky, and sometimes it's hard to find. So I just wanted to toss that in there, Richard. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, again, Unitronics, these particular components are manufactured in Israel. So if you have this equipment in there, just realize that, whatever conflicts that are happening around the world, you may feel indifferent to the whole situation, but you are going to be a particular target. So before I start this video, I'm going to give you a little bit of context. This is a particular incident that we worked on. There was, I think, 3 separate entities. So 3 separate water entities. This particular video was posted online on Twitter, and this was from a group called the Cyber Army of Russia. They were, I don't know if they were giving authorization by the nation of Russia to do this, but this is kind of an example of what I'm talking about. This particular group went into some systems that were accessible online, and they manipulated the water pumps, and were able to take a couple of different cities offline. Luckily, the city were able to fall back on manual operations and get things back up and online. But this is kind of an example of what we're seeing more and more often, okay? I don't know if there's particularly sound with this video, but I'll just kind of narrate through this. They posted this online, and they were just trying to show the capability that they had, and they were basically manipulating different configuration settings in these different water pumps. And they're going in and they're just changing settings. Like I said, it's actually a 5-minute long video, but the municipalities did confirm that this actually did impact their operations. And I think basically the user's just going in and randomly changing numbers and settings in here. You guys probably have a little bit more information regarding this than I do, but they're just going in and randomly changing numbers, seeing what they can manipulate and change. And again, luckily they were able to go back to manual operations, like I said. But this is actually pretty scary. This made the governor's desk, and he basically tasked us to start doing a little bit more education and awareness with public utilities and critical infrastructure. So, did you want anything to add on?
Yeah, I would just say that, this was the first time we saw this, but it wasn't the last.
Yeah.
So I've seen this impact a Trident turbidity filter, a saltwater injection well, several other types of infrastructure, and they get better.
Yep. So the
Which
more
is
and
the
more they
scary
do this,
part.
like Jonathan was mentioning, they're going to get better at targeting specific systems. So they really just wanted to make a point, post it online for everybody to see, and I know this made several different news media outlets, and like I said, it made the governor's desk, and it made him aware that this is a much bigger problem that we're going to be dealing with. So just understand that this is going to be happening, and regardless of how you feel about it personally, you definitely need to take steps to harden and protect your systems. So Jonathan mentioned a little bit about a different kind of insider threat. He talked about, you know, the angry employee. This example here is from a university that we recently worked on, a particular incident where a college professor was giving a lecture to students and inadvertently infected his system because he wanted to relay information and wasn't paying attention. So it can happen both ways, okay? It can be a legitimate employee just making a mistake, and this is a particular example of that. Like I said, university professor here in Texas was giving a lecture. They were actually recording the lecture when he was going through all these steps. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with a CAPTCHA. Usually, I think in your experience, it's usually a way to make sure that you are a living human being and not a bot. But in your experience, you may have gone to a website where you have to enter in all the different motorcycles or all the different cars or buses or crosswalks or so on and so forth. Attackers are getting more and more sophisticated doing this. This one in particular is requesting the user to verify they're human by actually typing in specific PowerShell script, which is usually out of the ordinary. And so, like I said, professor was distracted giving his lecture, trying to get detail to his students, and just started randomly, yeah, I just need to get the information, started going through the process. Went through and entered a PowerShell script which downloaded a malicious file onto the system. So he was getting all kinds of alerts and pop-ups during his lecture, and he kept closing them out, like, that's not important, I'm giving my lecture right now. So this right here is in the lower left-hand corner is the actual PowerShell script and the malicious file that he inadvertently pulled down. And this just kind of illustrates how, you know, if we get so conditioned, I think, with IT technology sometimes that we don't really think about what we're doing. So one of those education awareness tips that we always tell people is that if it looks out of the ordinary, always question it, okay? And that's probably one of the best steps that you can tell your employees or your coworkers, or just get into that habit of questioning, you know, what's being done. So again, it goes through the process, and it actually goes through an actual infection. So we're not going to embarrass the professor, but that actually did happen at a university here in Texas.
And it was interesting. You could hear him talk about, like, man, I would rather just click on the traffic cones.
Yeah, yeah. And
I think probably a classroom full of students didn't say, hey, you should probably pay attention to this or that looks weird. You know, it's just because it's just like you said, it's a conditioned response. It happens.
Yep.
And, you know, there's psychology behind, you know, how they develop their phishing emails, there's psychology behind how they develop their campaigns. I think it comes back to that preparedness. So I don't know if y'all have ever heard of the idea of appointing or having a security champion, you know, a security champion within your organization. But I think it comes back to that cultural idea that, you know, we're all targets, getting rid of the worry that, oh my gosh, I have to hide that I was impacted by a security incident. I think the fact that Richard can talk about his former employee or his former employer being impacted by a security incident. You know, I've probably worked over 135, supported 135 organizations in my 5 years at DIR going through ransomware. So it happens. We have to work better to prevent it. I think this is 5 or 6 slides that talk about how you build security, how you reduce the likelihood of impact in your organization from that OT side, from the IT side, knowing that most of y'all are probably not directors of IT or chief information security officers. So IT, OT different. They have different objectives, they have different priorities. We just need to start by understanding that. IT, you know, you're going to want to operate your business systems and make sure that your email is available you know, from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. OT systems, completely different. We talk about safety, we talk about security, we talk about working 24/7. So they have different goals, but it requires collaboration. So it requires water systems collaboration with the IT department, and it requires collaboration with the vendors that support your organization. And you talk about road mapping. How do we modernize our OT systems? Because a lot of them have not been updated. OT patches are difficult to implement, into the SCADA control systems. They're difficult to implement, and there's new technologies out there. So how do y'all build that roadmap so that you have maintained currency not only in your IT systems, but also in your OT systems? And that comes back to that establish a shared understanding. So we heard one of our organizations talk about risk. What is the risk tolerance? And I think for the risk tolerance for the IT side, it's probably a little bit easier to define than the OT side, because you don't want to have payment systems down for more than 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, whatever it is. But what is your tolerance for outages for the SCADA side? How long can y'all operate manually before you have to bring in Public Works Emergency Response Team, TextWarn, those other organizations to bring in resources to extend your operational capability? So it's a lot of collaboration. Let me talk about external partners. And this is where we've seen a lot of compromises come from the vendors. The video from the cyber army of Russia, that was a vendor managed system. So the vendor had the responsibility to mitigate that vulnerability. Does anybody remember the August 2019 cyber attack? You do? So it hit 23 organizations. So that was a rash of attacks. That was an attack on Colonial Pipeline. That was an attack on JBS. I think both of those stayed in the IT side. They didn't impact the operational side. But when you can't bill for shipping petroleum across the country, you have to shut down your operations to make sure that you're secure. So you're right. And in August 2019, we had 23 organizations impacted simultaneously because a vendor was compromised. And that vendor was up in this area. And like I said, we don't go into details about individuals who report security incidents to us, because that's confidential information and something that you're trusting us to hold steady. I'll say this. The contract that those organizations had with that managed service provider are often one page, built on a handshake. That really doesn't cut it any longer. It's important when you're building a vendor relationship to define your service level agreements for security incidents. Who's responsible? What are they going to do for you if they are compromised? How long do they have to notify you? Because you're going to have to communicate that up to your boss and then the city manager. And then the city manager is going to have to talk to the mayor or whatever your structure is. So defining that expectation in your contract from the very beginning, or making an amendment to make sure that you are communicated with clearly, really important. And it builds accountability and security considerations into those service contracts. Have those discussions with your vendors. They're very important. Know who to call during a security incident. We worked an incident kind of along the coast. It was in February. We spent about 5 weeks on site helping that county get back up and running. And my phone rang at 6:45 that morning. And the gentleman said, I've been trying to call people since 2 a.m. and no one's answered. So I always answer my phone. But that's important on the organizations across the state to know who to call. Whether you're talking about a cybersecurity incident, if it's DIR, if it's your police department, if it's your insurance provider, whoever it is, document it. And know that there are low cost and free resources available for you. You talked a little bit about knowing what's going on in the cyber world. That's kind of the threat intelligence side. But also understanding what's going on in the operational technology side of the house is really important, because threat actors make unique attacks for the OT infrastructure. And that's where these organizations, Water ISAC, the Texas ISAO, or the ICS alerts can come in. You might not be the right person to receive those notifications about Rockford automation system being vulnerable, but you probably know who in your organization is. Have a discussion with them. Make sure that they're getting that information. Make sure they're actioning it according to their policy. So we have something called the Texas ISAO. It's the Texas Information Sharing and Analysis Organization, and we hold a monthly meeting. It's an hour and a half, and Brian Viney, who's our senior threat researcher, does a really great job at kind of breaking down what is currently going on in cybersecurity for a non-technical audience. Yep. He partners with a gentleman by the name of Cody Autry at the Texas A&M University System. And Cody, he's not a technical person. He was diplomatic security in Iraq for years. So he kind of does a really good job about communicating with people on the non-technical side. So Texas ISAO is free to join for members in Texas and across the state, whether you're public or private, and you can get your security bulletin notifications and join the ISAO meeting monthly. And this helps really to keep you up to date with the current operational technology security trends. And then we want to harden our networks. It's just the same old analogy of you have door locks, you have cameras, you have sensors, you have gates, you have access control in buildings on your physical systems leading up to either your water treatment or your wastewater treatment facilities. We need to harden the technical side. Well, how do you start knowing what to do? It's always easier if you have someone that can either come in and look internally or look externally to give you some guidance. And that's where the idea of assessments come in. Assessments are a great way to start you on your cybersecurity maturity. They can be self-assessments or external assessments. So think about the AWWA Water Sector Cybersecurity Risk Management Tool. That's an internal assessment that you can enter with a group of your peers to give a good start about how your security maturity is. And that lets you make a roadmap. And if you really want to delve deeper, you can bring someone in to do an external cybersecurity assessment. We offer them through the Managed Security Services contract. It does cost money, but it is focused on that utility side, and it's priced based on your customer volume. And there's hundreds of other providers of these security assessments. But my favorite part about a security assessment is that when they brief the results, your boss is in the room. So you can clearly communicate from an external and unbiased standpoint your level of security maturity and build that roadmap to improve it or maintain it if it's already great. Because it does cost money just to maintain your security maturity. So that's really our first foundational step. Then once you have that assessment, securing your backups. Know where they are. And this comes into backups in all types. Customer lists, all the way down to your data historian. Knowing that your data historian is backed up and those OT, operational technology, SCADA components are backed up, those set points are backed up. So we saw the cyber army of Russia messing with the set points in the SCADA system. If you have those backed up and those documented, at least something recent, heck of a lot easier to rebuild those systems versus trying to bring in the engineering firm to do it from scratch. Those backups need to be segmented and they need to cover all of your organization. I think it's been 3 incidents now that I've worked where backups were not complete for a city and a county, and they didn't include law enforcement information. So they lost several cases and had to rebuild those from scratch. So in discussions with your IT or your operational technology lead, verify what's backed up and make sure that what's important to you from an operational standpoint and from a regulatory standpoint are backed up and secured. And then offline backups are key just in case of corruption. So there's a lot of solution that you can have about that, but I think it's more important to really encourage that collaboration with your service providers. Then we talk about securing your infrastructure. We talked about this earlier in several times. If it's easy for you to get into your system, it's probably easy for a threat actor to get into your system. So I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying you have to make a risk-based decision on whether that access is necessary or whether you can make it a little harder for your staff, but also a little more difficult for the cyber army of Russia or Volt Typhoon or any of the other ransomware or political threat actors to get into your system. And this goes one step further to your contractors. Richard found that operator screen on Shodan. And when we talked to the city about it, they didn't know anything about it. It was their contractor that had left that open because it was easy for them to get to. Well, that was not really okay with the city. Once they were aware of it, they amended the contract to make sure that secure remote management was a priority of that process. So understand your network infrastructure and topology. And then this is one of the challenges that we have seen is documenting an accurate OT network and system map. We not only see this on the OT side, we see this on the IT side as well. Anytime a police department or a sheriff's office is impacted with a security incident, they get isolated from what's called CJIS. That's the Criminal Justice Data Network that's run by DPS. In order for DPS to turn them back on, they need to make sure that their systems are secure. And one of those big steps to get them turned back on is having an IT network map that shows both the virtual and the physical side of the system. You know, if you operate a big system that has wireless connections, you know, understanding how those are documented and making a good understanding of that network flow. Segmenting your network is so important. One of the organizations we worked with recently, their SCADA systems were not impacted, but the server that hosted their historians were, because it was on the enterprise network. Segment.
Yep.
I think that everyone says, oh, our IT and OT systems are air-gapped. But are they really? That's a discussion for you and your IT staff. And minimize that third-party risk. Create a more secure gateway for third-party access, such as a dedicated jump box, VPN server, whatever it takes. But again, these are things that y'all have on the discussion side, and then you can back up with the contracting side. And this is really my favorite part of preparedness is pre-incident preparedness, left of boom, as they say, where we're talking about planning. Whose organization has an emergency management coordinator? Probably a lot of y'all. Anyone with a city, anyone with the county, government level, you have an emergency management coordinator. A lot of organizations in the private sector. They're required to submit a plan to TDEM. It's been a while since I've reviewed this, so every couple of years. We offer a template through what's called our DR Incident Response Team Red Book that kind of looks like an emergency management plan. If they don't have it, if y'all don't have an incident response plan, getting with emergency management, getting with IT directors, and building this cohesively is a really great option. And then you exercise this plan. Thinking about our exercise we did in Waco a few weeks ago. We spent over 2.5 hours talking about a ransomware scenario or a security incident scenario, and I've never met a more talkative group than the water side. It's great. Sometimes when you're talking to IT, they say, it just would never happen. But man, it was great to see the water experts talk about how they would respond. So again, another part of the ISAO program is we have a whole bunch of tabletop exercises that are developed with the local view in mind, and we're developing a 4-hour progressive scenario for IT and OT systems specifically. Start small, don't reinvent the wheel, you know, talk to your neighbors, see if you all want to work together on a tabletop exercise, use some of the resources that are available to you, and if you want us to come out and facilitate it for you. I'm not saying we can facilitate one for every single organization in the state, but let us know and we'll see what we can do. Our numbers will be in on the last slide. So these are the resources that I'd wanted to provide for y'all. Now I know with paper you can't click the link, but you should be able to Google search DIR Incident Response Team Red Book. And assuming you don't get one of the CAPTCHAs that downloads malware on your computer, you'll be able to get the template that helps you build an incident response plan. And then it's a good resource. So I was working with a city in the Valley, and they said, our systems are encrypted, but we have public information requests coming in. How do I deal with this? I said, I'm not a lawyer, but I know our chief privacy officer knows this answer. So we got him a good answer, and then we put that in the Red Book so that anyone else who's having this situation has a resource. So that's what the Red Book is. It's just dozens and dozens and dozens of resources that should help you work through security incidents. The DIR OCISO Services Guide. If you want to pay for services that are from DIR on our contract. This is the services guide that shows you what they are. Security awareness training, penetration testing, things of that nature. The Stop Ransomware Guide is such a great resource for your IT to read. Might not be the best for the operators. But MSISAC's first steps within a cybersecurity program, a little more understandable to individuals who are not IT experts. These three resources, APPA, EPA, and AWWA, you know, they're three different sectors obviously, but they are really good resources for risk assessment, incident response planning, and assessments of cybersecurity maturity. If you have staff that are really interested in the ICS, industrial control system space, and want to learn more about it, CISA has some online courses that they can take. And what's nice is once you take those online courses, you can become eligible to take an in-person course in Idaho at the Idaho National Labs. We sent one of our analysts up there, and he said it was one of the best training experiences that he's ever had. Now, this guy spent a lot of time in Afghanistan as a Green Beret, so I think going to Idaho during the summer is a great experience. But the training is really phenomenal because you're learning what cutting-edge operational technology, how to secure those systems. We also, of course, everyone has every public sector entity has a statewide cybersecurity awareness training requirement. That resource is here. And something that I'm really proud of is this resource. So DIR partnered with the Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service to develop a customized cybersecurity awareness training for operators for water and wastewater systems. So this is a free, online, self-paced course. So this is 4 hours, so it's a bit of a commitment, but you can break it up over time. And it talks about the importance of cybersecurity in the water space, you know, real-time best practices, and delves a little bit deeper into what we have here. We also have one for law enforcement. If you have law enforcement within your operations, that gives them TCOL credit. This class gives 4 hours of water and wastewater operator credit. I'm not exactly sure what kind, so it's on the course license. And then we're also developing a energy sector specific training with Texas Tech University. So take this class. Give it to your staff, give it to your analysts, make it available because it helps increase the cybersecurity awareness for everyone. ISAO. If you want to get on that ISAO distribution list or have one of your analysts or team members get on that ISAO distribution list, which is my preferred method for a distro list, have someone else get their email flooded, but have the opportunity to sit on these monthly meetings, Texas ISAO or isao@dr.texas.gov, let us know and we'll get you hooked up. We talk about threat intelligence sharing a lot. You know, there are billions of attacks against the state network each year, and the only reason we're able to protect that network is because we have good cyber intelligence. A lot of that cyber intelligence comes from the phishing emails that we all get and submit and are analyzed. I think if you take this back to your IT department, this would be a great resource. If you have phishing emails that are malicious, IT can submit those as attachments to security-alerts@dir.texas.gov. Operators, y'all may not have to submit this, but send this to your IT folks and use that as a conversation starter about what your cybersecurity program looks like. And then, of course, if you need it, if you are in dealing with a security incident response and you want to talk to one of my analysts or one of the threat researchers, this 1-877-347-2476, I think that was right. I'm a dyslexic, so hopefully that's correct. You can see it up there. That rings 24/7 to one of the CERT team members. And that's only going to expand as we transition from DIR to Texas Cyber Command over the next few years, where we're increasing the capability, increasing the resources that are available. So if you don't know who your insurance provider is for cyber insurance, also to have that discussion with your finance department, your risk manager, because time is really critical when you're dealing with a security incident. So I think these are available in the packet. If you have any questions on them, I'll be more than happy to talk about it. I always like to leave with this idea. How do we prioritize cybersecurity or information technology maturity or security maturity, whatever you want to call it, when we don't think we have all the resources that we need? Well, it's three things. I think this is common across all specialties. It's people, your staff. Providing training opportunities, providing engagement opportunities is a great resource to mature and get your staff more experience. Processes, writing things down. Starting with the DR Incident Response Team Red Book as a baseline for your response plan, and continuing to write things down and document processes and procedures. And then tools. We have tons of tools that are available to support and secure IT and OT systems, but limited funds. So as you invest in your tools, ask your vendors to provide proof of concepts and make sure that what they're doing is meeting your needs, and that you're not getting into tool creep, where you're buying one tool for its phishing analysis, one tool for its EDR, and one tool for, try and synchronize your tool resources as best as possible. Be thrifty with your resources, but but make sure that what you're asking for, your vendors can meet. So people, processes, and technology or tools. Those are how you build a successful security program. Richard, anything you want to add out in closing?
No, I think you covered those resources well. So, that pretty much concludes our presentation.
We appreciate y'all's attention and collaboration. Pass it over for the closeout.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, so let's get a big hand of applause for all of our speakers. They did a fantastic job. Before you leave, if you could, please fill out the evaluation forms and just leave them over here on the table with Amanda. Again, thank you all for your participation. We appreciate you being here and look forward to more training sessions in the future. My name is Wendy Lundeen. Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful rest of your day.